the girl discovered a horrifying sight on her arm. A bizarre barb had grown. Even more shocking, the barb could extend and retract, resembling the claws of an animal. In a panic, the girl quickly grabbed a pair of scissors, but as soon as she cut off the barb, she realized that her palm had also started to show signs of trouble. Staring at the barbed wounds on her palm, the girl felt herself unraveling. Her body's transformation had begun after an eventful party. In the not-so-distant future, by 2025, the Earth had suffered massive air pollution due to humanity's reckless destruction. Toxic particles and dust filled the atmosphere. Breathing in polluted air caused severe damage to the human respiratory system. Humans living on Earth had no choice but to wear masks, and compressed clean air became a highly sought-after commodity. However, corrupt air companies took advantage of the situation, jacking up the prices. A bottle of compressed air that had once cost $5 suddenly skyrocketed to $5,000 overnight. In order to survive, people had no choice but to pay the exorbitant prices. But not everyone could afford the expensive air, and those without money had to breathe in the polluted air, suffering and waiting for death. The girl's name was Ella, an advertising model. Ella's life had been tolerable, and her monthly income was just enough to cover her air expenses. But one day, at a party, Ella discovered that her boyfriend, Tully, was hooking up with her best friend. Seeing the two of them so close, Ella lost her temper, realizing he was in the wrong. Tully quickly left in shame. However, Tully didn't notice that he had forgotten the blue bottle of medicine on the floor. Ella assumed it was the stimulant they all used at every party. One small vial would make the user's brain hyperalert. Frustrated, Ella picked up the vial and drank it in one gulp. What she didn't know was that this time, the vial wasn't the usual stimulant, but a new drug developed by a gang. The drug was designed for just one drop. If consumed in excess, it would send the user into a violent, uncontrolled state. Not long after drinking it, Ella felt a shift in her body. Disoriented, she sensed a primal energy building inside her, almost bursting to break free. The feeling was unbearable. Meanwhile, Tully suddenly remembered the drug. He rushed to the restroom to look for it, but was stopped by a few people and thrown into the bathroom. It turned out that the bottle of medicine was something Tully had stolen from the gang's lab when he was getting supplies. The drug was still in the experimental phase, and taking it directly could not only cause the user to lose consciousness, but also have severe side effects. During the struggle, Tully managed to grab someone's gun, but he was too scared to shoot. Instead, he accidentally shot himself in the thigh. Realizing things were getting out of control, the gang didn't dare stay longer. They quickly patched up Tully's wound and hurriedly left. Tully, finally able to open his eyes, looked around only to see Ella hanging from the roof. Upon learning that the drug had such severe side effects, Ella looked at Tully with disgust. She realized he had tricked her best friend into taking the drug so that he could take advantage of her. Ella thought Tully was scum. Furious, she stormed out of the restroom, but as she reached the stairwell, she saw the gang blocking the door. To avoid being caught, Ella climbed out of the restroom window. However, when she broke the glass, she made a noise. The people who heard the sound rushed to the window in a panic to escape the gang. Tully followed Ella, but while fleeing, he accidentally fell off the roof. Seeing Tully knocked out from the fall, Ella didn't offer help. Instead, she jumped down and climbed over the wall to escape. As she reached the street, Ella suddenly felt dizzy. Before she could react, she collapsed unconscious. Fortunately, the man driving the car was Ella's friend. Upon finding her passed out, he assumed she was just drunk and took her into his car. By the time the others caught up, Ella was already gone. When they dropped Ella off at home, the friend was preparing to leave, but when he looked at Ella in her revealing clothes, he began to have improper thoughts. Seeing Ella wake up, the guilty friend quickly left her house. Staring at the barb on her arm, Ella was puzzled, but what she didn't know was that this was far from the worst part. When Ella went to the bathroom, she discovered her arms were covered in deep wounds, some of which had started to rot. Clenching her fists, the barb extended from her arm once again. She grabbed a pair of scissors and cut it off. Staring at the horrifying sight, Ella remembered the drug. Could this be the side effect? Unsettled, Ella rushed to the hospital, hoping to see a doctor, but when the doctor saw her wounds, he immediately suspected she had contracted some kind of contagious disease and prepared to quarantine her. Hearing the word quarantine, Ella panicked. She turned and ran down the hallway, trying to escape the hospital, but accidentally ended up in the ICU. As Ella struggled to figure out what to do next, she noticed that barbs were also growing on her fingers, densely packed. At that moment, security arrived at the room, and Ella climbed up the wall to hide from their search before escaping the hospital. The more Ella thought about it, the more terrified she became. It felt as though she was turning into some kind of beast. If she were discovered, she would likely be taken to a lab for experiments. With nowhere else to turn, Ella sought out her best friend. However, the terrifying transformation had only just begun. While staying at her best friend's house, Ella noticed that her body's decay had not improved, it had worsened. Even her nails were starting to fall off. Seeing this, her friend urged her to go back to the hospital, but Ella was too scared to return. In addition to her physical decay, Ella noticed something even more disturbing. She felt an endless surge of strength within her. Just a gentle pull and the oven is broken. Just as Ella was at a loss, she received a mysterious phone call. The person on the other end claimed to know what was happening to her. Ella guessed that the caller was someone from the gang, and to find out exactly what kind of drug she had ingested, she agreed to meet. However, when Ella met the man, he attacked her from behind and knocked her out. When Ella regained consciousness, she found herself locked in a room. By now, her mutation had become even more severe, with red rashes covering her face. Seeing that the room was empty, Ella used the barb on her arm to cut through the ropes binding her. As she was about to climb out of the window, she smelled a strong scent of blood. Ella turned and found some raw meat on the table. Unable to control herself, she grabbed the meat and devoured it hungrily. The noise attracted two men who entered the room. When they saw Ella had woken up, the leader told her to calm down, explaining that they meant her no harm. The man introduced himself as Solomon, a scientist, and the other man was his colleague. Solomon explained to Ella that the drug she had taken was not a stimulant, but a genetic mutation serum. Solomon had developed the serum using dragonfly DNA to help humans adapt to the polluted earth. This drug could alter human genetic structure and make them immune to toxic air. However, their research had angered a powerful corporation, which sent assassins to stop the project. In order to protect the serum, Solomon and his colleague had allied with the gang, but when Tully came to the gang to make a deal, he stole the serum, and that's how Ella ended up ingesting it. Due to the unfinished nature of the drug, Ella might end up turning into a monster. Hearing this, Ella felt completely undone. She was about to ask if there was any antidote or suppressant when suddenly, a fully armed soldier burst into the room. They captured both Ella and Solomon, and in the chaos, Solomon's colleague took the opportunity to escape. When Ella opened her eyes again, she found herself lying in an operating room. In a daze, she saw a man standing beside her. The man introduced himself as Eric, the CEO of the corporation. He promised to help Ella with her treatment, but Ella was to become a test subject. If the experiment succeeded, Eric would not take a single penny and would even give Ella a large sum of money and lifelong free oxygen supply. Before Ella could agree, the nurse injected her with a needle. After careful examination, Eric discovered that Ella's genes had completely mutated. Theoretically, Ella was no longer human. Furthermore, scientists discovered another fact. A special enzyme had formed in Ella's body, one that could neutralize the toxins in the air. Eric brought the report to Ella and told her that this enzyme was crucial for humanity. If it could be mass-produced, people wouldn't have to wear masks anymore. Under Eric's persuasion, Ella was moved. To save humanity, she signed the contract. But no sooner had Ella signed her name than she suddenly felt dizzy and passed out on the hospital bed. When Ella opened her eyes again, she found herself in a laboratory, with Eric watching her from outside. At first, Ella thought Eric truly wanted to help humanity, but she soon realized he was far from noble. Eric planned to extract a large amount of Ella's blood, separate the useful genes using technology, and then sell these genes at a high price to the wealthy. Eric believed that Ella couldn't hear the conversations outside, but he didn't know that, due to her mutation, Ella's senses were incredibly sharp. She could hear even the faintest sounds. Realizing she had been deceived, Ella angrily slammed the glass, but then realized it was too late. Eric pressed a button, releasing a pungent white mist in the lab. After inhaling it, Ella felt weak and collapsed to the ground. Eric ordered his assistants to begin the extraction process, intending to destroy Ella afterward. However, just as two staff members were bringing in equipment, the unconscious Ella suddenly woke up. Ella managed to escape from the lab and found herself in a prison. She sought out Solomon, hoping to rescue him. When Eric discovered Ella's escape, he immediately sent his men after her. She thought his seasoned men would easily capture Ella, but now, fully evolved, Ella's red blotches had disappeared, and her skin was covered in tiny barbs. Eric's men who arrived at the prison were ambushed by Ella. And one of them had his neck snapped. After rescuing Solomon, Ella ran into the underground tunnels with him, listening to the air flowing through the pipes, using the sound to gauge the best route to escape. But as they reached the basement, Ella realized someone was approaching quickly. Solomon was about to take action when the person who appeared turned out to be his colleague. It turns out the escapee had learned Solomon's location through a friend and disguised himself as a cleaner to rescue him. The three of them fled in a van, hoping to escape the laboratory, but as they were about to leave, Eric spotted them. A soldier shot out their tires, causing the van to flip over at the roadside. However, when the soldiers approached, they found that Ella and Solomon had disappeared. The moment the van flipped, Ella and Solomon were thrown out of the vehicle. Ella used the barbs on her arm to tear through a metal fence, but they were still within Eric's territory, and there was no way out. During their escape, the two arrived at a dam. Looking down at the bottomless drop, Solomon knew he couldn't escape anymore. He handed Ella a vial of medicine, a booster that would perfect her gene integration. Solomon urged Ella to leave and find her teacher, who was also an expert in this field. Just then, Eric arrived at the dam with his man. Solomon told Ella to leave quickly and take the research with her. Seeing Solomon's resolve, Ella leaped off the dam, disappearing into the mist below. Furious at Ella's escape, Eric took Solomon back to the company, demanding he create a new formula or else he would be killed. But Eric didn't notice that. From a distant mountaintop, a woman with wings stood watching, and that woman was none other than the fully evolved Ella. Clearly, Ella's story is just beginning, but this is where the movie ends. This concludes the full plot of the 2024 disaster movie Restoration. That's all for today's share. See you next time.